One story, one decision. Everything changed. The brochure was sitting on my kitchen table when I came back from my walk, and my son had highlighted 3 lines in yellow before he left. Sunny pictures of people my age playing cards, a heated pool, a phrase across the top that said, "A vibrant community for active seniors." My son David had written on a sticky note, in the handwriting I taught him at that same table 40 years ago, "Dad, just look at it. We love you." I stood there in my coat and read it twice, and then I sat down, because my knees are not what they were, and I understood that my children had decided to sell my house. I want to tell you how I knew that, since a brochure for a retirement community is not a confession. I knew because 2 weeks earlier, my daughter Karen had asked me, very casually, while she was drying dishes she did not need to dry, whether I still kept all the important papers in the den. I knew because David had brought a man named Russ to Thanksgiving who turned out to sell real estate, and who spent 20 minutes telling me what houses on my street had gone for recently. And I knew because I am old, and I am not stupid, and those are 2 different things that my children had started to confuse. My name is Walter. I am 76 years old. I worked 34 years for the county water department, the last 11 of them as the man who signed off on every easement and property line that touched a public main, which means I have read more deeds and titles than most lawyers ever will, and I have a filing habit that drove my late wife to distraction for 41 years of marriage. Ruth used to say I would file my own obituary in triplicate. She was probably right. She passed in the spring of 2022, and a great deal of what happened next happened because my children assumed that when Ruth died, the careful one in the marriage died with her. They had it backwards. Let me take you back, because the brochure did not come out of nowhere. I have 2 children. David is 51, sells commercial insurance, and has been between good years for about a decade in a way that always seems to involve a boat or a timeshare. Karen is 48, lives an hour away in a subdivision where the houses have 2-story entryways and no books, and married a man named Greg who has opinions about wine. I love them. I want to say that clearly before I tell you the rest, because everything that follows is the story of 2 people I love deciding that I was a problem to be managed instead of a father to be visited. After Ruth died, they were good to me for about 4 months. Casseroles, phone calls, Karen coming by on Sundays. Then the calls got shorter, and the Sundays turned into every other Sunday. And somewhere in the fall of 2022, the tone changed. They stopped asking how I was and started asking how I was managing. Managing the stairs, managing the yard, managing all this space. The house became all this space in their mouths, as if the home where they grew up were a storage problem. The house. I should tell you about the house, because the house is the center of everything. It sits on Lindenwood Avenue, a 1958 brick colonial with a maple in the front yard that Ruth and I planted as a sapling the year Nixon resigned. For bedrooms, a den I lined with shelves myself. A back porch where I still have my coffee every morning at 6:40, because that is when the light comes over the Henderson's roof and hits the maple. Ruth and I bought it in 1971 for $31,000. Today the houses on Lindenwood sell for somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000, because the city grew out to meet us and a good school district grew up around us. My children did the math on that long before I did. I just did the math more carefully. Here is the thing my children believed, and the belief is the engine of this whole story. They believed the house was simply mine, free and clear, an asset sitting in their aging father's name, waiting to be liquidated either by talking me into a sale or, failing that, by getting power of attorney over a man they could describe as no longer competent to make his own decisions. David said the phrase elder care planning to me once in October, and the way he said it told me he had been reading about conservatorship. What my children did not know, because Ruth and I never told them, was what we had done with the deed in 2009. In 2009, the financial world was coming apart, and I watched two men I worked with lose their homes to a second mortgage and a lawsuit, respectively, and it frightened me in a way that a careful man does not enjoy being frightened. So Ruth and I sat down with an estate attorney named Harold Beck, a serious man with a downtown office and a handshake like a car door, and we did something deliberate. We placed the house, and most of what we owned, into an irrevocable trust. Not a simple will, not joint tenancy with the kids. An irrevocable trust, with very specific language about who controlled it, who could sell the property, and under what conditions, and who would inherit and when. The deed to the house on Lindenwood has not had my personal name on it since March of 2009. The owner of record is the Walter and Ruth Family Trust, and the sole surviving trustee, the only living human being with the legal authority to sell, transfer, or borrow against that property, is me. Not David, not Karen, me. When I am gone, the trust distributes the house according to terms I can still amend while I am alive and of sound mind, and I had not amended them in years because I had no reason to. My children did not know any of this. They had never asked to see the deed, because why would you ask to see something you assume you already understand? They believed they were dealing with a house in their father's name. They were dealing with a trust their father controlled and could rewrite. Those are not the same thing, and the distance between them turned out to be about $650,000 wide. So when the brochure showed up on my table, I did not panic, and I did not call my children to argue. I made a cup of coffee, and I went out to the porch, and I watched the light come over the Hendersons' roof, and I decided to let them show me exactly how far they were willing to go. I have found that people will tell you who they are if you simply stop interrupting them. It took them 6 weeks to show me everything. The first move came in January. David and Karen came over together, which they had not done since the funeral, and they sat me down at the kitchen table with the careful, rehearsed expressions of people who have practiced a conversation in the car. David did the talking. He said they had been so worried about me alone in the house. He said the stairs were an accident waiting to happen. He said a place called Magnolia Springs had an opening, and that it was honestly really nice. Dad, you'd have friends, and that they could handle all the logistics so I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Karen held my hand when he said the part about logistics. She has soft hands. She also did not look at me when she said the house would obviously need to be sold to cover the costs, because Magnolia Springs ran about $6,000 a month, and that adds up, Dad. I asked them one question. I asked who would be handling the sale of the house. David said Russ already had a comparative market analysis ready, that they could list in the spring, that it would go fast. Karen said they would need me to sign a few things so they could help manage everything, and that Greg knew a lawyer who could draw up a power of attorney just to make it simple. I told them I would think about it. I have learned that the 4 most powerful words a calm man owns are, "Let me think about it," because they cost you nothing and they buy you everything. Time, information, the chance to watch what people do while they wait. What they did while they waited told me everything I needed to know. Within 9 days, David had called Magnolia Springs and placed a deposit on a room using his own card, which I learned later because the facility sent a welcome packet to my house with his name on the billing line. Within 2 weeks, Karen had been inside my den. I know because I keep my files in a specific order, alphabetical then chronological, the water department habit, and someone had gone through the drawer marked house and put the folders back close to right, but not exactly right, the way someone does when they do not know that the order itself is the lock. Within 3 weeks, Greg's lawyer had mailed me a durable power of attorney, already filled out, with David's name as my agent, and a little colored tab that said "Sign here" next to a line waiting for the signature of a man they had decided was no longer fit to manage his own affairs. And within a month, the part that I will not forgive, Karen brought her teenage son over, my grandson Cody, who is 16 and decent and was not in on any of it, and had him help Grandpa sort through some things you won't need at the new place. A 16-year-old boxing up his grandfather's life on instructions from his mother, who had told him it was a kindness. Cody asked me, while we were wrapping Ruth's good plates in newspaper, whether I was excited about the pool. I told him I was, because I was not going to put the truth on a 16-year-old. The truth belonged to the adults who had earned it. There was one night in early February I want to tell you about, because it is the night I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. I could not sleep, which happens more often since Ruth, and I came downstairs around 2 a.m. for a glass of milk, and I sat in the den with one lamp on and pulled the house folder out of the drawer Karen had been in. I read the whole trust again, cover to cover, the first time in years. Harold Beck had been thorough. Every contingency Ruth and I had worried about in 2009 was answered on the page in plain language. And I sat there at 2 a.m. and I felt two things at the same time, which is a hard thing to hold. I felt a deep, settled gratitude toward my wife, who had sat in Harold's office with me and insisted we do the harder, more expensive version of the paperwork, the irrevocable trust, when I had wavered and suggested we just update the will. Ruth had said, and I can still hear it, "Walter, do it the way that protects you when you are old and tired and someone is being clever at you." She was talking about banks and lawsuits in 2009. She turned out to be talking about our own children. The second thing I felt was colder, and I am not proud of how clear it made me. I felt the last of my hesitation leave. I called Harold Beck's old number the next morning to confirm the firm still had the original documents on file. They did. I asked them to pull my file and have it ready. The woman on the phone, Denise Okafor, asked if everything was all right, and I told her everything was about to be. I also did one quiet thing that week that I want to mention, because people assume an old man cannot verify what is happening to him. I drove down to the county recorder's office myself, the same building I worked out of for 34 years, and I pulled the current deed of record for my own house, and I held the printout in my hands at the counter. Owner, the Walter and Ruth Family Trust. Recorded March 2009. I knew it would say that. I needed to see my children's certainty and the county's record disagree on paper in my own hands, so that on Sunday, I would not be telling them a story. I would be showing them a fact. By the middle of February, they had a buyer interested before the house was even listed. Russ had shown it privately, walked strangers through my den and Ruth's kitchen and the back porch where I have my coffee. While I was at a doctor's appointment David had helpfully scheduled for me. A couple from out of state offered $640,000, cash, quick close. David called me, and I could hear him smiling through the phone, and he said, "Dad, it's happening. This is going to be great for everybody." Great for everybody. I wrote that one down too. I let it run 4 more days. I wanted the offer in writing. I wanted the power of attorney in my hand, and I wanted both of my children in the same room, because what I was about to do, I was only going to do once, and I wanted no version of it that happened over the phone where it could be softened or denied later. I called them and asked them to come to the house on Sunday afternoon, and I asked them to bring Greg and to bring all the paperwork, because I told them I was ready to get everything sorted. David's voice went bright. He thought he had won. On Sunday, February 23rd, the 3 of them sat at my kitchen table with a folder of documents, a pen, and the particular cheerfulness of people who believe the hard part is behind them. The purchase offer was there. The power of attorney was there. A Magnolia Springs move-in agreement was there, with a start date 11 days out. Karen had brought a coffee cake. Greg had brought his opinions. I sat down across from them, and I had my own folder, a plain manila one, which I set on the table without opening. And I told them I wanted to say a few things before anyone signed anything, and that I would only need about 10 minutes, and then they could respond however they liked. I started by thanking them. I meant it. I thanked them for worrying about the stairs, which do creak, and for the casseroles in 2022, and for the fact that they had at least chosen a clean, well-reviewed facility instead of dumping me somewhere grim. David relaxed when I said that. He thought I was working my way toward yes. Then I asked David a question. I asked him whose name was on the deed to the house. He blinked and said, "Yours, Dad." Obviously. Karen nodded. Greg, who fancies himself the sharp one, said, "We pulled the county record. Walter, it's in your name, we already checked." And that one sentence told me they had done just enough homework to feel confident and not nearly enough to be right. Because the county record does say a name. It says the Walter and Ruth Family Trust. Greg had seen the words and read only the one he expected. I opened the manila folder. I laid out, one page at a time, slowly, the way I used to lay out easement maps for the county commissioners, the documents that made up the last 16 years of my financial life. The trust agreement from March 2009, signed by me and Ruth and notarized by Harold Beck. The deed transferring the house on Lindenwood from Walter and Ruth, as individuals, to the Walter and Ruth Family Trust. The page naming the trustees, Ruth and me jointly, and then, after Ruth's death, me alone, as sole surviving trustee with full authority over every asset the trust holds. The room had gone very quiet. Greg picked up the deed and read it the way you read a word you have been mispronouncing your whole life. "I want to make sure I am being clear," I said, "because I have spent my whole life making sure documents are clear. The house is not mine to be taken. The house belongs to a trust. I control the trust. Not David. Not Karen. Not a power of attorney. Because the trust cannot be sold just because someone holds my power of attorney, which any lawyer Greg actually paid would have told him before he mailed me that form." I slid the unsigned power of attorney back across the table toward David. "No one is selling this house unless I, as trustee, sign the sale, and I am not going to sign it." David started to talk. He used the word competent, and then he stopped himself, because he heard it land in the room. The plan had always quietly depended on the idea that if I would not agree, I could be made to seem unable to decide. And here I was, 76 years old, laying out 16 years of correctly executed estate documents in chronological order from memory, which is not the performance of a man who does not know what day it is. "You were going to have me declared incompetent," I said. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to. "You placed a deposit at Magnolia Springs on January 14th. Karen went through my den between the 20th and the 27th. Greg's lawyer mailed me a power of attorney that names David as my agent. You showed my house to strangers on the 11th while I was at an appointment David scheduled. And you had Cody, who is 16, box up his grandmother's plates because you told him it was a nice thing to do." I let that sit. I know the order of all of it. I told you. I file things. Karen was crying by then. The kind of crying that is partly shame and partly the collapse of a plan. She said, "Dad, it wasn't like that. We were trying to help. The stairs, we were scared something would happen to you, and we wouldn't know." "I believe that you were scared," I said. "I believe you told yourselves a story where this was love. People are very good at that. But you did not come to me and ask. You did not sit on the porch with me and say, 'Dad, we are frightened. What do you want the next 10 years to look like?' You decided what I wanted. You priced my home. You found a buyer, and you brought a form for me to sign. And the only reason you are hearing the truth today, instead of after the sale, is that I read the documents you assumed I had forgotten." Greg, to his credit, had the sense to say nothing. Then I told them the part one had decided on the porch 6 weeks earlier, watching the light come over the maple. Here is what happens now, I said. I am not going to Magnolia Springs. I am staying in my house, because it is my house, held in a trust one control, and I intend to drink my coffee on that porch for as many mornings as I have left. I am also not cutting either of you out of my life, because I am not interested in spending my last years being bitter, and because you are still my children and Cody is still my grandson and none of this is his fault. David exhaled. He thought that was the end of it. But the trust is going to change, I said. This week, with Harold Beck's firm, or whoever has it now. As of 2009, the two of you were the equal beneficiaries of everything Ruth and I built. The house, the savings, all of it, split down the middle when I die. I am amending that on Tuesday. I looked at David, then at Karen. The house on Lindenwood, when I am gone, goes into a trust for Cody's education and his first home, administered by someone who is not either of you. The remainder of the estate will be divided, but not in half, and not the way it would have been in January. You will each still receive something, because you are my children and Ruth would want that. You will receive considerably less than the man who showed my house to strangers was counting on. The kitchen was silent except for Karen. I am telling you this to your faces, I said, the same way you should have come and told me yours. You are welcome here on Sundays. You are welcome to call and ask how I am, instead of how I am managing. The pool at Magnolia Springs is very nice, I am sure, and someone else can enjoy it. The maple in the front yard is 49 years old. I planted it. I am going to be the one to watch it turn this fall. I stood up, which takes me a moment these days, and I walked them to the door of my house, and Karen hugged me, and David did not, and Greg shook my hand with his car door grip, and they drove away in cars worth more than Ruth and I spent on the first 10 years of that home. I will tell you how it has gone since, because I know that is what you are waiting for. I called Harold Beck's old firm on Monday morning, the 24th, and his partner, a sharp woman named Denise Okafor, handled the amendment herself. By that Thursday, the trust was rewritten exactly as I described it at the table, and the power of attorney David mailed me went into a folder marked "Attempted" because I file things. The out-of-state buyers were told the house was no longer for sale, and Russ, the realtor, sent me a stiff little email about wasted preparation, which I did not answer. David did not call for 2 months. When he finally did, it was the week of Ruth's birthday in May, and he did not mention the trust or the house, and neither did I, and we talked for 9 minutes about nothing, and it was a start. Karen comes by some Sundays now. She does not dry dishes that are already dry, and she does not ask about the den. Last month she sat on the porch with me at 6:40 in the morning and watched the light come over the Hendersons' roof without saying anything, which is the closest thing to an apology I think she has in her, and I decided to accept it. Cody knows the truth now. I told him myself, on the porch, when he turned 17. I told him his grandmother and I had set something aside for him a long time before any of this, and that the house he helped pack up boxes in was never going anywhere, and that one day a part of it would help him build a life. He cried, the way 16 and 17-year-old boys cry when they're trying not to, and then he asked if he could have his coffee out on the porch with me at 6:40, and now he does, on the mornings he stays over. People hear this story and ask me if I forgave my children. I tell them forgiveness and trust are two separate accounts, and you can pay into one without the other. I forgave them because carrying it was heavier than setting it down. I did not restore the trust because forgiveness is a feeling and a trust document is a fact, and I have spent my whole life being careful about which is which. They forgot whose name was on the deed. The truth is, the name was never the point. The point was that I read every page, kept every copy, and remembered the order. They mistook a quiet man for an empty one. Ruth could have told them. She spent 41 years watching me file things, and she knew that a man who keeps careful records is just a man who is paying attention, and that the worst mistake you can make with someone who is paying attention is to assume he has stopped. I am 76. I own my mornings, my maple, and the truth of what happened at that table. I intend to keep